IMSA truly is in a golden era. From the jam-packed grids that showcase many of the newest and greatest cars in sports car racing, to the incredible fan interest that continues to explode with each passing race. 2025 looks poised to continue these trends, so buckle up and let Formula Jonah and myself take you through everything you need to know ahead of the Rolex 24 at Daytona. Now, it's easy to forget, but Lamborghini didn't make their IMSA debut with their SC63 until round 2 of the IMSA season last year at Sebring. This came after the manufacturer encountered big setbacks in testing that forced them to skip the season opening race. They would eventually join the IMSA grid in Sebring and compete in the remaining 4 Michelin Endurance Cup races of the season. In those races, though, there weren't a whole lot of positives for the Italian manufacturer, as they were only able to muster a best finish of 7th, and that was in that season opening, for them, Sebring race. Easily the highlight, though, of their debut season came at the rainy Battle on the Bricks. There, they led laps in the early going of that race, and were able to show what that SC63 was capable of in those wet conditions. 2025 presents a new set of challenges for the team. There's going to be a new team operating the SC63 in IMSA, and that's Riley Motorsports. And they're still going to be facing that same stiff competition this year, albeit their competitors now also have an additional year of experience under their belt. Yet despite all of these challenges, the car is going to be entering its very first Rolex 24. And they're going to be doing it with a very strong driver lineup in Mirko Bortolotti, Romain Grosjean, Denny Kvyat, and Eduardo Mortara. No, I don't think that the SC63 is going to be one of the favorites to win this race. After all, this is only the car's 5th IMSA race, and we haven't even seen them get a top 5 finish yet. But the car did survive the entire 12 hours of Sebring, as well as both of their entries surviving the 24 hours of Le Mans, with no significant issues, so they have that going for them. They've also shown strong pace in all of the testing sessions that they've taken part in. Recently, at the November IMSA sanctioned test, the SC63 actually set the fastest lap of the weekend on a 1:35.611. And they also backed that up with the 4th overall fastest time in last weekend's Roar before the 24. Now look, I'm not trying to say that Lamborghini is going to come out and dominate this race, not by any stretch of the imagination. But I certainly think they could surprise some people and be in the running in the closing stages of their very first Rolex 24. Over to Jonah, what do you have for us?
Lamborghini's SC63 is indeed a cool addition to the Rolex 24 grid. But did you know that there are some more new entries racing at Daytona this year? And one of the new arrivals is in the LMP2 class. The car is the number 73 Pratt Miller Oracle 07, which will not only make its first appearance at Daytona, but in IMSA as well. Pratt Miller Motorsports makes their return to prototype racing for the first time since 2016, when they were involved in the Corvette Daytona prototype program, which was around from 2012 to 2016. And they can trace their prototype roots even further back to the Chevrolet-powered Intrepid RM1 GTP. Alongside their 2025 participation in the GTD Pro class with Corvette entries, the number 73 LMP2 car from the team will contest for the P2 class win, and the car will be driven by Callum Ilott, Chris Cumming, Pietro Fittipaldi, and James Rowe. Now, another new entry that I wanted to mention in LMP2 is the number 43 Inter-Europol P2 entry, as this particular chassis from the Polish team has never raced before at the Rolex 24, although Inter-Europol competition did compete at Daytona in 2024 with PR1 Matheson Motorsports, when the two teams had a partnership going. The remaining cars that are new to the Rolex 24 at Daytona this year are all GT entries, and the list includes the number 9 Pfaff Lamborghini that's competing in GTD Pro, the number 19 Van der Stur GTD Aston Martin, the number 20 Proton Competition Porsche 911 that races in GTD Pro, the number 36 DXDT Racing GTD Corvette, the number 66 Gradient Racing GTD Ford Mustang, the brand new number 69 Get Speed Mercedes entry contesting in GTD Pro, the number 70 Inception Racing Ferrari competing in GTD, the number 81 Dragon Speed Ferrari in GTD Pro, the number 83 Iron Dames GTD Porsche, and finally, last but not least, is the number 91 Trackhouse by TF Corvette that will compete in the GTD Pro class. Van der Steur Racing, GetSpeed, DXDT Racing, and Trackhouse have never competed before at the Rolex 24, but they all have past racing experience. Van der Steur Racing has made the step up from IMSA's Michelin Pilot Challenge, where DXDT Racing has been predominantly involved in the GT World Challenge America series, where GetSpeed has been competing over in other series and raced in big events like the 24 Hours of Spa, for example. And then there's Team Trackhouse, as the American squad is known for their participation in NASCAR, and they're teaming up with TF Sport to run this Corvette entry for the Rolex 24 exclusively. And they're bringing some pretty talented drivers along the way, including Ben Keating, Connor Zilisch, Scott McLaughlin, and NASCAR Cup Series winner Shane Van Gisbergen. The other GT entries I mentioned before have seen the teams race at Daytona, but these particular cars haven't raced before. I also want to mention that there are a few other teams that are doubling up for the 2025 event, and their second cars will be making their debuts here at Daytona. These teams include Shank Racing and GTP, who add the number 93 car to their squad. Then there's Paul Miller Racing in GTD Pro, and finally the GTD class will see both AF Corsa and Triarsi Competizione bringing additional Ferraris to the event. Now, with that segment out of the way, let me hand things back over to Stu.
Now, one of those entries that Jonah just talked about is one of the feel-good stories of the Rolex 24, and that's Shank Racing. It was just 2 short years ago that they stood on top of the podium after the first race of the LMDH era with a convincing win in the Rolex 24. And this would be the team's second win in a row at the Rolex after capturing the final Rolex 24 of the DPI era just the year before that. However, weeks after their 2023 victory, a dark cloud would overshadow all of the great accomplishments that Shank Racing had just done. It emerged that Honda Racing Corporation reported that the tire pressure reporting data that Shank Racing was sending to IMSA during the Rolex 24 had been tampered with. The result was heavy penalties that IMSA passed down onto the team. We're talking points penalties and suspensions. But perhaps no penalty was worse than what happened to the relationship with Acura. Later in the summer, it would be announced that Shank Racing would not return with Acura for the 2024 season, and instead 2 Acura ARX-06s would be run by Wayne Taylor Racing. The news was obviously hard for Shank Racing to take, as despite a 2023 season that saw them take 3 wins, they were going to be without a ride to compete with in the GTP class in 2024. Now, thankfully, their absence from the IMSA grid would only end up being a single season. And after previously running just a single Acura ARX-06, it was announced that Shank Racing would be returning to the grid in 2025, but this time running 2 of the Acuras. This came as they would be taking over the entries from Wayne Taylor Racing, who had just announced a move back to Cadillac for the 2025 season. So with their return to the IMSA grid, it now means that Shank Racing are actually going for their 3rd straight Rolex 24 victory in a row, at least of the Rolex 24s that they've participated in. They have their own little streak to keep alive, and they're looking to keep that streak going with 2 very strong entries. Their first entry is the flagship number 60, and it will consist of Tom Blomqvist, Colin Braun, Scott Dixon, and Felix Rosenqvist. The second is part of a multi-year agreement, and that's actually going to be engineered by Honda Racing Corporation. In the number 93 car, it will feature Nick Yaloli, Renger van der Zande, Alex Palou, and Kaku Ota. Now, the return of Shank Racing to the GTP grid is going to be great to see. And after how we saw them perform in the 2023 season, I don't think they're just going to be a contender for this Rolex 24 win. I think they're going to be a contender for the overall season championship. Back over to you, Jonah.
Thanks, Stu. So you may have seen that the recent Roar Before the 24 event didn't feature any qualifying sessions like it has in the past. And no, thankfully you didn't miss qualifying for the Rolex 24 this year. And that's because the schedule before the race looks a little different compared to before, as qualifying will be taking place just 2 days before green flags are waved at the speedway. For 2025, IMSA made a change, which resulted in the Roar Before the 24 not featuring any qualifying sessions or a qualifying race like what was held in 2021 or in 2022. This ended up changing the primary focus of the Roar Before the 24 this year to the IMSA scheduled practice sessions for the WeatherTech entries exclusively. And the action from the event was mainly from the VP Racing Sports Car Challenge, as IMSA Support Series had their traditional race on the weekend. Qualifying for Daytona will therefore take place on Thursday, January 23rd, and it will be separated into 4 different sessions for each individual class, which is actually something else that's new for this year, with the GT class qualifying sessions being separated. And on Thursday, we will see cars out on track across 90 minutes of qualifying action. The WEC's 24 Hours of Le Mans has a similar schedule, as the qualification for the event is set up on the Wednesday and Thursday before the race gets underway on Saturday afternoon. When it comes to Daytona though, after the grid is set for this year's Rolex 24 on Thursday, this means we'll only have to wait just one day before the racing action gets underway on Saturday afternoon. Back over to you, Stu.
Thanks, Jonah. Now, there are very few, if any, drivers who have a better career in North American sports car racing than Andy Lally does. His career has spanned decades, and this year's Rolex 24 will be the last of his full-time racing career. Andy Lally was one of the iconic drivers from the Grand Am era, which would later go on to merge with the American Le Mans Series into modern-day IMSA. Across his career in Grand Am, the American Le Mans Series, and modern-day IMSA, Andy has captured over 24 class wins, and along with it 5 wins in the biggest race of the season, the Rolex 24, to go along with 3 championships. He's also well known throughout the paddock as somebody who is extremely difficult to pass, even if you're a prototype. And while many drivers and teams will be happy that they don't have to worry about navigating around him on track, he truly is one of the icons of the sport, and very likely will be in the IMSA Hall of Fame one day. The 2025 Rolex 24 could also see an end to a very impressive Ironman streak for Andy. According to a recent Racer article, which I'll link in the description, this could be the last of Andy's, quote, 22 or 23 consecutive Rolex 24 starts, which he believes may be a record. Now, while this icon of the grid did say that this Rolex 24 will mark the end of his full-time racing career, he left the door open for future one-off entries, whether it be in the Rolex 24 or other races. Otherwise, he won't be far from a racetrack, as in his next role, he's going to be the president of the Trans Am Series. Now, in his final Rolex 24, Lally is going to be competing with a team and a co-driver that he spent the majority of his career with. That's Magnus Racing and John Potter. Now, Magnus Racing and their now Aston Martin Vantage GT3 Evo have had some strong finishes in this race in recent years, and I don't see any reason why they couldn't do it again. They will be giving it their all to see a storyline complete in this GTD class that I think a lot of us would like to see unfold in the race. Best of luck to Andy and the rest of that Magnus Racing team. Now, these aren't all the storylines heading into this year's Rolex 24. Go check out Formula Jonah's video right here for the rest of what you need to know. Huge shout out to all the channel supporters. If you too want to support the show, you can head to patreon.com/offtheS's, click that join button below. Once again though, thanks for tuning in. I hope everyone has a great race weekend and doesn't go off in the S's. Seriously, go check it out.